All right, guys. So I've got a very special interview today, and it's great to get some of the best experts on board. Scott, he's got a wealth of experience in the corporate level. It's absolutely amazing for him to come along and do this video interview. And as you know, I've got a very big following, nearly 30,000 followers on LinkedIn, interviewing some of the best directors around the world. And Scott is one of those guys that, he's one of the best. He's ranked right up there. And one of the things I like to do is I like to interview great people, do these real interviews with you. And I'm sure my audience, who follow me, I've got thousands and thousands of fans and experts ranging from all spheres, all checking into this interview to follow the story and let people know how I go out of my way to interview great people like Scott. First things first, this is purely an educational video interview. It's straight off the bat. I know you guys like real interviews, so I'm bringing you real interviews to you. And Scott's going to share his wealth of experience about how the digital landscape is changing, how companies are changing. So look at this as a way where you can learn and build and also understand what Scott is trying to say. Because like I say, guys, I interview great people from very high level, and Scott is one of those guys that I feel has got a lot of knowledge to share. So I think you guys are going to really enjoy this video interview with me and Scott for the next 30 minutes. And also understand that from a very high perspective, this is some of the best knowledge you're going to get from a guy that's a veteran for over 20 years, working in the corporate background. And oh boy, I think there's a lot to be said about that. Scott, welcome to the interview. It's great to have you. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Naz. What can I say? Well, I think I've been a veteran for nearly 30 years.
Oh, 30 years, right, okay.
I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. But yeah, I've been in, I guess, IT, technology and services, pretty much man and boy. So yes, straight out of my 20s, I've been in the telecoms arena. I've held numerous executive levels or leadership roles within the carrier, telecommunications and IT service provider industry. I've also had 2 startups as well.
Right.
Both received successful exits. And I'm now on my 3rd one.
Right.
I recently started Gather in November of last year.
So this interview is going to be talking about the thriving age of the digital landscape, how companies are changing. It was something very personally important to you, and it's a topic that you brought up to me in terms of you see the world changing right beneath your eyes and so forth. And one of the things is how the Facebooks, the Ubers, are really monopolizing the society. My first question to you is how do you see the digital landscape playing out?
Well, I think we're in the age of the platform provider, that's for sure. And I think it's got good and some positive things that have come with that. And I think there's also some things that we need to be kind of cautious about as well. I think broadly to date, platforms have been a force for good, I think. But these, particularly the platforms that are operating within their own ecosystems, the Googles, the Amazons of this world as well.
Right.
Significant power. I think there is, we need to be a little bit cautious about them as well, because you're starting to see their ubiquity of data starting to really take hold now and disintermediate many different service providers. And I think in some ways that stifles creativity as well.
Right. So we're talking, just to get to this interview and tell the audience, this is about Scott's views about, the thriving age of the platform players in our society, telling us exactly what is going on. And this was just a brief introduction of Scott sharing us his knowledge. Now we're going to dig right into the video interview. Scott, monopolization, you talked about the Ubers, the Facebooks, really trying to take over. How do you see that emerging now in a world where we have these companies, the Facebooks, the Ubers, the Amazons, starting to monopolize everything? We saw, Facebook, take over Instagram. We've seen Uber revolutionize the real estate market. We've seen Airbnb change the hotel market. How is that playing out in terms of monopolization, so we can share this to the audience?
Well, I guess there's, first of all, I think there's two distinctions between a platform and a platform which has its own ecosystem. So
right.
if you look at an eBay, if you like, that is, seller seeking buyer, utilizing a platform in between to make that bridge. It's, kind of a, Tinder, if you like, is another one of those kind of things.
Yeah, the dating app.
Two people just try together that are being facilitated via an application of one kind or another. And I think, again, that could be driver, that could be rider, and then utilizing that through Uber as being as a platform that would enable that. And I think those have been very successful in terms of making a user experience far better than it was before, and bringing, in effect, some forms of competition into a market where maybe some forms of complacency has started to take hold. I think when you start to look at the larger organizations like the Googles of this world, which are a combination of platforms as well as other things as well. So, I mean, Amazon being the perfect example of that.
That's a great example, yeah.
You've got Amazon Web Services, you've got Amazon as a marketplace, you've got all of the power that goes around with that organization as well.
If you look at Amazon, the book services, they started off just doing books, and now look where they are now with e-commerce.
Yeah, they forget that it started off as an online book company.
Yeah, that's what I mean, yeah.
It doesn't resemble anything like that now. But I guess the key thing to know about all platforms is it's a scale business. So the more customers that you have, the greater reach that you can get, the more data that you can harvest, the more powerful that you become. And that then becomes a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, really, then, because you can make, and I think we'll talk about this a bit later, but once you start to reach that kind of virtuous circle, you become hard to stop in many ways. The very big and most talented people want to work for you. You can pay more than anybody else. You can stop other talent starting to go into your...
We'll go into the interview and discuss those questions shortly, because I think there's a lot to said about that. But coming back to the main thing, you see as, these companies as like a gospel in the business world. They're starting to change and really control every part of our society. How do you see these companies playing out in terms of monopolization? Is the society being monopolized?
Well, I mean, that's a big question, isn't it? And you're starting to see. So I guess what you are starting to see now is their size and their influence has reached such scale that they're starting to be looked at very closely. You see in America, they're talking about the breaking up of these large monolithic businesses to try and allow greater competition to come into the marketplace. I don't think we're anywhere near that yet in terms of reaching that.
If you see the shops, they're starting to close down, small businesses, and e-commerce is changing, and bigger businesses like Amazon are starting to take over. Is that a cause for concern in terms of monopolization?
Well, I think it is. I think all of these things are interesting issues, aren't they? I mean, if you just stopped for a second and thought about the deconstruction of the retail sector, and that is breaking up communities almost. Places where people used to go and meet, and now you've got vacant high streets. And the negative impacts that's having on people's lives. I guess that, the counter argument to that is that pricing is falling. You've got better, a better convenience, essentially. You can have things
better shoppers experience.
Yeah, but that benefits a particular type of society more than it, benefits others. If you're a little bit older and you look forward to that kind of, high street experience where you would kind of make a day of it, that's doesn't particularly bode well for them. And I
Right.
think all things now, it's only when they become apparent do people then start to look at them and then
Yeah.
start really unravel, what is the benefit of this? Nothing usually ever comes for free in life.
No.
Is great advances in one area usually means the curtailing of the other. It's evolution, isn't it? That's what it is. But I think for me personally, the more
Is it something to be scared of? Monopolize of these big sectors like the Airbnbs, the Facebooks. Is it something to be scared of because they're taking every part of our society and controlling the information and the wealth of data?
I think it's something to be absolutely cautious of, for sure. Whether it's to be scared of it or not. I mean, in my own business now, which we're working on, we work with AI companies. We utilize, the recording of conversations to be able to deconstruct the content of a conversation. We build a great deal of analytics around that conversation, but we do it in a way that can start to provide great deal of value and transparency but anyway, people will naturally, I think, be cautious about where's that data going to be residing. What are you going to do with that conversation once it's been recorded? Or more importantly, if it was in an organization, is once I've left that business and I've moved elsewhere, what's going to happen for that data? I think there's some very powerful things and some very positive things that can come out of this technology. But I do believe, even as somebody who's very much at the center of it and immersed within it, we have to be true to ourselves about the way that we're applying this.
True.
I think held in the wrong hands or without the right governance, it can be a dangerous thing. And as such, I think oversight, regulation, if you want to call it that, not that I'm a fan of a great deal of regulation, but there is need for this, for sure. And again, going back to your original point, Naz, which is some of these organizations are bigger than governments themselves now.
Yeah.
They have resources that governments would sometimes envy. And that's hard to hold those types of organizations account. And I think that's where you've reached this kind of strange nexus point now, where these businesses are so big. They have proven, not necessarily either, to be good custodians of the power that they hold. And I think that's usually when governments start to involve themselves and start to take a kind of closer look at these things.
It's certainly interesting to hear that, Scott, about how it is important to be cautious about how these businesses are starting to monopolize our society. My next question is there's many emerging players in the digital market. And we see how they're controlling every substance of our data. We've heard all this about fake news from now information being taken down from the Facebooks to the Instagrams. Is there a cause of concern that these companies are now starting to control our information and people now want back their data?
Yeah, well, yes, yeah.
From the fake news and all this is all happening. I think a lot of my audience know about this.
Yeah. So, but this is the bargain that we made with these organizations at the beginning of it. And I've in a couple of blogs, I've talked about the opaque nature that we have with these organizations. So, people will say that, okay, this Facebook, if you want to put a name on something, that is free. Well, there's nothing for free. You don't make billions of dollars a quarter in earnings by providing anything for free. It's just they choose to monetize it through a different method. And that method is that they take your data, they harvest that data, they get a very deep understanding and profile of who you are and what you are going to do and your hopes, your fears, your dreams, all of those kind of things. And they wrap that up into a nice little bundle and they will present that to the person that's prepared to pay the most for it. And that's how they make their money.
Guys, that's honest information there. I don't think we'll get that sort of realist knowledge and education about what, this is going on, and Scott is sharing his views. But yeah, please carry on, Scott.
Yeah. So I mean, so that's the true, transparent relationship that you have with social media organizations. You pay nothing for a service, while actually underneath that you pay a great deal for that, and it's partly your privacy, it's partly your data, and that is it. Now I think that
Is that unfair? Is that unfair for content creators, the people who, put in the work? I spoke to a few directors and they say that content creators should be rewarded. The people that give their data should be rewarded. It shouldn't be so centralized, and they shouldn't be reaping the profits from your information. Is that
so my view on
fair?
it now is that
Fair.
most platform providers, they start under what is called a freemium model. So it is free at the point of use. It is free at the point of use to basically gain subscriptions. The more subscriptions you get, the broader audience you have, the more access
Right.
to data that you have, the more power you hold and you can control. And over time is that what you would normally do is you would pull them through a digital journey, teasing them to get access to more premium type services, at which point you would then provide them with a subscription of one kind or another. And that subscription then becomes a transparent relationship. It's for a set of pounds, shillings and pence, is you then receive this particular service that has this depth of functionality. So the obscurity of the relationship starts to kind of disappear. And I think for me is when you start to think there's a combination of things that is here. The freemium model is still there,
Right.
but the size of the organization, they now have billions of subscribers. The depth and breadth of data that they have is awe-inspiring in terms of what it can do. Indeed, it can change governments, which is a crazy power.
Crazy, yeah.
And then if you look at that, you then start to think to yourself, has it reached a point now where, I mean, personally, I know, depends what that price point would be, but I would certainly pay a subscription for a service and keep all of my data to myself rather than have it shared.
I think that's what a lot of people want to do now. They're starting to see that they're giving this data and information over, and these big companies are reaping the profits.
Well, and maybe, yes, not only that, Naz, but maybe not being really good custodians of that data as well.
True, yeah.
And some of that data and the analysis of that data is being used for, I think, something that nobody would have signed up for at that time.
No.
And I think that's why people are starting to take a closer look at these things.
I think my audience is going to love this interview so much because it's so real and to the point. And I think that there'll be a lot of questions asked around that. Now, talking about the Facebooks and data, we see, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, more or less going into a billion-dollar company and connecting us all over the world. Where do you see now the skills of these people going? We have a very big social inequality, I would say, an education inequality happening where some of the best talent is going, are being used, by the Facebooks, but some of the people that don't have the talent but have the education is not being, I would say, filtered into these companies because we live in a society where, the best education or the best talent counts rather than someone that goes to a normal university and may not have those skills and experience to move forward. How do you see big companies playing out when it comes to, picking their talent?
Strange, isn't it? Because it was
very strange.
Years ago that was supposed to be this technology that we're all kind of using now was supposed to be the democratization of technology. So, tools would become available to everybody that they could then start to kind of create their own solutions. But then it turns out and transpires that over time, it's a big boys game. So, there's two points, I think, to your point to reflect back to you. So I think that the larger organizations have such resources made available to them that they can outspend anybody should they wish to acquire that talent. And
Right.
that isn't, it's sort of a bit like your Barcelonas and your Manchester Uniteds, isn't it? That they have, and your
The best of
Liverpools
the
and
best.
all those kind of guys, is that they have their feelers out into every academy. They get to see real talent, real intelligence, real breakthrough stuff before anybody else gets to see it as well. And they can nurture it and they can bring it through, and it's a distorted playing field.
Right.
So even when there are kids that are out there that have exceptional talents, is they're spotted far earlier by the very, very big players. And I think that's exactly the same that you find yourself in, same
Right.
situation that you'll find yourself in with large technology companies. But on saying that, what you do have, I guess, as a legacy of democratization, is that you do have capabilities. The cloud is allowing startups to be able to compete in an area. I'm an example of the one with Gather. I've created a global video conferencing and collaboration solution with AI, and I've managed to be able to do that through the power of the cloud, essentially. And that in functionality terms is now available to be able to compete against any of the bigger brands that are out there. So it is possible for startups to be able to create competing offers. That competing offer will also attract a certain type of graduate into that type of environment. The people that I'm attracting into my business are nowhere near the same people that are attracting into the likes of Facebook and Google. We have a different field. However, I've got something that is extremely interesting and exciting for people to be able to get hold of, and that attracts a particular type of highly intelligent, highly motivated young person. And I'm much more open to having those types of conversations.
Right. I'd love to talk about Gather in our follow-up interview. It would be great to hear all about that. But apart from that, what I want to understand is, what about those guys that don't have the word of mouth, or they come from a university which is not so high tech, and they're really struggling to get into these companies, whereas the finest talent, we would say the Cambridge, the Harvards, the York universities, the best Stanford, are hiring that. Are we seeing a social disparity or inequality happening, shall we say, when it comes to the world of work?
Partly, yeah, I think. It's that kind of classic solution, isn't it? Which is, what was the argument 2 summers ago, was talking about getting an internship into a decent company, is that internships were not paid for. So the only people that could actually get into an internship were the ones whose parents could afford to effectively stick them up into accommodation for the summer in London, pay for them to be able to be fed and watered while they were working for nothing. That was the argument a couple of summers ago, which I clearly, and that clearly is, if you like, the way that no finer example of demonstrating how unfair it is.
I'm sure my audience would know, the guys that are watching this video interview, how much knowledge Scott is sharing with us. But I think everyone remembers the day of free internships, and there was actually a public poll against it to stop, and actually went into government, that these free internships were ludicrous for some of these guys, working for free. And I'm sure people tuning into this video interview would probably agree. Would you say so?
Yeah, I mean, it's not fair. I mean, that's the truth of it, and I look at it. It tends to be who you know rather than what you know that allows you to then have a set of economic circumstances that you can benefit from, that can allow you to be able to take an internship which is attractive to an organization. On saying that, going back to your point, which is what would be my advice to your listeners that are seeking to get into these high-tech organizations, is I think I am an example of that, which is I don't expect to pay nothing to provide somebody with a chance of employment.
Right.
To pay somebody for that. And I'm not a large brand either. So, effectively there is an implicit transaction here, which is because I'm not a Google or I'm not a Facebook, I will pay, but I will also look for high degrees of talent and commitment as well. So I think you'll find lots of entrepreneurs there that are willing to give, graduates breaks to get their first foot onto the ladder. They will still have to demonstrate their desire to work and, be able to prove that this is the industry that they want to be in and that they can make a positive contribution to the organization. And they'll probably learn more in a startup environment in the first 12 months than they'll learn in the first 5 years of working within a much more mature business.
But from a non-paid job to a paid internship, you would say.
Yeah. So I think, you'll find, I've got a guy called Mike who we took on. I think he's loving it at the moment, but he's working very, very long hours for sure, but he's being paid for them. And he seems to be enjoying it a great deal because there's a lot to learn in a startup. You have to wear multiple different hats. And I think that's what I would direct your viewers to do.
Great thoughts, Scott. It's an absolute privilege to get Scott on this video interview, sharing some of his finest knowledge. And I hope this resonates with a lot of people. My next question is we see a winner takes all strategy. We see the WhatsApp, we see the Instagrams. Like I say, Airbnb, took over real estate. What else? We've got Facebook taking over Instagram. And basically, we spoke about monopolization. We spoke about how these companies are monopolizing it. You did mention that, we are living in a certain way. We should be cautious about the data we give. And I hope everyone in this video interview will see that in a sense of education. But how is this sort of impacting our society when others are moving forward, but those ones that, the businesses, the smaller businesses are falling behind? How is that affecting our society?
I'm not sure I have I'm not sure I have the answer for that now. I mean, I guess there's some, I think partly the question is, how do you compete against those organizations?
Correct.
So I could talk on that subject for sure. So I think there's an overwhelming theme that's occurring in the world, which is around the kind of the fragmentation of things. So the best example I would give you is, you look at the media and the TV channels that are out there now. You have got literally a channel for anything that's there. So but it shares a common response. So it needs to be, if you're going to be in the media industry now, you've got to have a very narrow focus and a very deep amount of content around what that is. So you've got to know your audience, and it's got to play to that particular type of audience vibe, if you like.
Yeah.
Very, very deep. And you can consume that on demand or whenever you want. So you can consume stuff in podcasts now, you can do it in streaming media, you can do it on satellite TV, you can do it in any of those kind of things. So you see that, if you are just into cars and you're into mechanics, there's umpteen different things that you can go to, and that will be the thing that will focus your attention. All of it will be available online. All of it will be on demand, essentially. I could give you another example of that, which is probably a bit more closer to home, actually, which is charities. So, the amount we spend on charities is pretty much remained static over the last 10 years, but the amount of charities increased several fold. So, and there's numerous reasons for that, because you've got platforms like Just Giving that make it easier, and it's a lot more easier to set up a charity as well. But in the past, where you had, say, one organization which everybody knew the name of, something like Mind, and that would take care of all mental health issues, from addiction therapy to Alzheimer's and dementia and beyond, is now that you have the ability for you now, as if somebody was tragically affected by Alzheimer's, you could pop up a Just Giving page within weeks, and then people will donate to you because it's extremely relevant to you. So, and that then itself, it doesn't necessarily mean people give more. They just distribute it to the element that then got their attention. That's such. So now you've got, Alzheimer's for Asian men, Alzheimer's for, middle-aged women, whatever it would be. So the fragmentation of that dollar spend is just being redistributed in various different ways.
And how would you see that in big tech companies in terms of, you mentioned competition?
So that's the choice. So
right.
When you look at most big players, technology players, they're very much horizontal in their nature. So here it is. Here's a great bunch of tech. It's absolutely fantastic, this tech, and it solves 14 different problems. But it's down to you to understand how relevant it is for you and what you do. I think the future of technology is going to be much more the battleground, if you like, for technology. It's not going to be around feature parity, because most of this stuff is software now. So, and you can make that bridge within a matter of weeks, really, in terms of catch up, in terms of feature parity. The real battleground will come down to being marketing, understanding your audience, understanding the problems that they have, and then being able to make yourself extremely relevant to them. And it'll be that micro niche markets where you'll be able to drive a wedge into large corporate offerings, Google offerings or whatever it would be, find your niche in that world, and then start to dominate that niche and find ways that you can spread out from it from thereafter.
Great answers, Scott, and a very sort of well in-depth thought you gave towards that. Especially, we don't really hear this on the news, or we read it in the magazines. This is why we're doing a realist interview, and why a lot of people are going to enjoy resonating with this interview and finding out what you've got to say. My final question is that we're entering 2020. We're embarking on a new decade, and are we going to see more companies disrupting at the very top level? And is it healthy for smaller businesses that are basically suffering on the brunt of this? Where do you see it playing out?
Yeah, I think I guess echoing a little bit what I said earlier, it's about you either get big, and the ones that are big already, or you get niche, and you find that relevant thing that will enable you to build trust with your audience, and transact with them in a very low cost way.
It kind of is with me, with my audience. I've built a lot of trust. A lot of people who've seen me on LinkedIn working with various players from all different fields. I think you've kind of hit it on the nail there when it comes to trust and making sure what your audience wants. Is that where we're going with the society? Is that where we're going now, where companies need to start paying attention to what people want, rather than sort of take their information or sell them a product that is not really needed?
Yeah. So, I mean, with my peer group, we talk about this a lot, actually.
Trust.
So trust is massive. So there's a great book that you'd love, actually, called Platform Strategies.
Right.
So they did the first kind of academic view about what makes these platforms work, and trust was the pillar of all of it, actually.
I'm not surprised, Scott.
Yeah. If you didn't have trust, is that it all kind of falls apart. But what I think what you're kind of you're
referring.
I think what you're going to find is that you've got to build this trust and empathy with your audience, but more important, and that empathy really comes down from understanding the pain. So I think we've been very guilty of being able to just, isn't this cool?
Right.
At them, where actually now you've really got to do the hard yards, which is, what is the problem for you? So say if you're in recruitment, what is the thing that really is challenging you as a recruiter today? Is it the fact that Indeed have come in and you've got LinkedIn and you're being disintermediated, and all of your mid-market customers are starting to do recruitment in-house because they don't feel that there's a need for you any longer?
Do people find it hard to self-express themselves, do you think, when it comes to this? Especially when it comes to working within the company, if there's any concerns or ethical issues, or is it something we should just keep within ourselves?
So what I think is that we struggle as an industry, technology as a whole, has struggled as an industry to basically get to grips with what are the business challenges that we have. I work in B2B most rather than B2C.
Right.
But in B2B is that we have often struggled to be able to understand what is the business model that they operate under, and being bothered to do the thinking about what are the challenges that they're facing externally over the next 5 to 10 years. And really thinking about that. So now I know if you do that, you know what keeps the chief executive awake at night. You know what keeps him awake at night, you can understand what are the 4 things that chief executive is making his C-level management team awake at night thinking about and trying to solve.
Right.
Come at it from a business point of view. What is the outcome that we're seeking to achieve, rather than just presenting a bunch of tech to them, and then starting to try and then really bring that relevance to market. Is you have far deeper and engaging conversations. But the problem is there's very few people that can make that bridge. And that is a skills gap that we're finding. A real problem in our industry is finding the people that can understand that pain within an organization and bring to bear the relevance of how you can solve that and make that move it forward.
Oh, what a great interview. This is, Scott, learning all about, what your thoughts are. There's been a number of times trust has been thrown at me as a topic, especially with veterans and experts like yourself, where it looks like this is a very key cause for concern in terms of how, trust is built between your peers, between B2B. Would you say, to finally wrap up this interview, we need to start building more of that with people?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, medias like this are fantastic to be able to do that. I think I see myself, particularly with my peer group, people being kind of less concerned about, if you like, shielding an intellectual property that they might have. They feel much more open to sharing it. I know the younger generation under me are fantastic at that, and something that I've certainly learned from recently is that you can raise yourself by don't raise yourself by putting people down. Raise yourself by elevating others around you, and you have a much better conversation around that. Keep your mind open to new suggestions and new ways of working, and I think that's a much more that's one of the greatest things I think that's coming through about this new generation, actually, is that they're far more open than previous ones and looking for, a common positive outcome.
Right. Scott, it's a privilege to have you. It's good to learn and take your thoughts. Like I say, Scott's got over 30 years of experience. He's an amazing veteran. We've got that right, and it's good to learn all about it. On a serious note, my audience are going to enjoy this interview. Do reach out to Scott as well. If you directly need to get in touch with him, you'll definitely find him when I put my post up. You'll see what he does and what he's all about. Scott, it's great to get you on board. We've touched upon the many different issues, and I'm sure the people are going to respond back and enjoy. Thanks for having you, Scott.
It's a pleasure, Nas. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, guys, so this is a wrap. Great to have another great expert on board. Looking forward to posting this. And if there's any questions you need to ask, do please get in touch with Scott to let him know what you can do with one another. It's great to get great people and share this interview out to my audience. It's a wrap. Thanks very much. Bye.
Bye.